about whether my AI looked anything like you saw. Let's just
It
start
did.
there.
It was really good. Yeah, it was really good.
Anything you change in that AI Jesus? Any notes for me to get it more accurate?
Uh, the eye color, his eyes were greenish and almost blue, like
Hmm.
dark greenish blue. Uh,
Dark greenish blue. Hmm.
Hard to describe,
Hmm.
but they weren't brown, which kind of shocked me.
Is there
But like
a,
the hair and the skin color and all that, which that was something else that people like I told you, they just have this weird idea of Jesus' skin color, and you'll get people to say Jesus was black and Jesus was this and he was that, and how could you be so stupid to think he was blonde haired and blue eyed? And I'm like, I just never really gave it a second thought as what I was shown as a kid. So, a white kid in North America is going to see a white Jesus.
how about the skin? Were there wrinkles? What kind of age did you see?
He looked no wrinkles at all. Not old. He looked to be like I guess the image that I have that I saw was like a resurrected. You know how the Bible says we're going to have our perfect body. We're going to be the
Yeah.
perfect you. You're going to have your resurrected body. That's the way I looked at him. Because everybody always asks me about the scars in his hand, and there were no scars. But he didn't have scars. He didn't have, nothing, no bleeding from his head from the crown of thorns. I mean, all that stuff was just like it was gone, and he was the perfect person, like his resurrected body.
And how about the hair length? I've seen, that famous painting by the young girl who painted
Yeah,
the Prince of
yeah,
Peace, and his hair is kind of shorter and
yeah.
back.
His hair was
Um,
shorter in there.
was it, yeah, tell me about his hair.
It hit his shoulders, and it was probably down to about here, and it was kind of a wavy, dark brown, but you got the color right. And like I said, the skin color was good.
Hmm. So the Prince of Peace painting has the hair a little shorter, but as
Hmm.
far as the face that you saw, was it the same face?
Not exactly. I have people send me that picture all the time. It's
I
it's
bet.
funny. I actually on Facebook, and I can send it to you if you want. I posted a picture that I came across one time
I
of
saw that.
Jesus. Yeah,
That's when
but
I
it's,
tried to model it off of.
his skin was lighter, but that was, I look at those eyes and I think that's the Jesus I met. Clean him up and yeah,
And
looks
when
a
you
lot.
look at his eyes, I know you described the color, but is there an inner light or something more deep than a traditional human eye?
I would say it was just love. And the only way I've ever described it is when his eyes looked in mine, he looked into my soul. Like as soon as our eyes met, he knew me. He was the brother I never had, the father the perfect father. It was just love. It was all love.
Great. All right. So before we actually begin, I just want to read a couple of verses that came to mind as I heard your story to kind of set the tone. And the first one, I'm sure you've heard all of these, is from John 14. And it's right before Jesus dies. And he says, "Do not let your hearts be troubled. You believe in God, believe also in me. My Father's house has many rooms. If that were not so, would I have told you that I'm going there to prepare a place for you? And if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come back and take you to be with me, that you also may be where I am. And you know the way to the place I'm going." Of course, referring to himself. And the reason why I say that is because you saw a city. City has rooms. And so I
Mhm.
love when you find supporting details from the text that match real people's experience. And then the second one is Matthew 7:78. Ask and it will be given to you. Seek and you will find. Knock and the door will be opened to you. For everyone who asks receives, the one who seeks finds, and to the one who knocks, the door will be opened. This is something I really believe is true, that people who genuinely seek Christ will find him. But what's interesting about your testimony is that it doesn't appear you were seeking him, and yet he revealed himself to you anyway. Would that be accurate?
Yeah, that is accurate. I wasn't seeking him like I do now and I
Hmm.
did after the NDE, but it was the whole childhood prayer that just
Hmm.
popped into my head the next day. I thought, man, I used to ask God every night to show me heaven, because of my grandfather's funeral.
Hmm.
The priest said it's such a great place. I was like, yeah. So I want to see it. And I asked him for 40 years. And, I mean, not as much when I was a teenager because, you
Right.
start doing other things. But as a
Yeah.
kid, I used to ask him that every night, show me heaven, show me heaven. Really want to see it. And then whenever somebody else would die, I'd be like, God, you still haven't shown me heaven. Come on.
Hmm.
But 40 years. And then I started thinking about, the significance of the biblical 40 years, so
Hmm.
much so many things you have to wait 40 years for. And Jesus finally said, okay, kid, here's the answer to your prayer.
It
I'm
is
going to show
amazing
you.
when some of the timing works out like that.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
hear a lot of those details as I've been watching some other NDE videos as well. People having it happen when they're 33, which is the same age as,
Hmm.
Jesus and stuff. So it's always fun when those things happen. But your point about having a prayer as a child also reminds me of the verse in Matthew 18 about, truly I tell you, unless you change and become like little children, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven.
Yeah.
And I saw another NDE, and he came away with a similar experience to you of the restoration of that childlike wonder and that childlike joy. And my understanding of your story is that that has not left you since meeting Jesus. What are your thoughts on that? And has it stayed?
Yeah, you know what? It has. It's been 21 years now. And I still look at, the things that I told those guys when they were doing the movie was, my iPhone's full of pictures of sunsets
Mm-hmm.
and I mean things like that just stop me in my tracks. And I honestly do look at stuff still to this day and go, man, where'd you come up with the idea for that one?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I'll go to the zoo and look at animals and think, golly, you've got quite an imagination, Lord.
Mm-hmm.
All these it's just so magnificent and it works so well together. Everything just, even though it's a sinful, fallen world and a curse
Mm-hmm.
that we live under, it's still just a beautiful place. You
Mm-hmm.
just, man, I tell you, I mean, the infinite brain, if you will, of God to come up with all this stuff and how it, rain that we get from the sky and then
Mm-hmm.
it's life sustaining and just all that stuff. It just, man, you start thinking about how it all works together. It just blows your mind.
And what's fascinating to me too is I find a lot of truth is often actually very simple, but it's so easy for us to just start missing the things that are so obvious and they're right in front of us. And,
Yeah,
and nowadays in the world, I feel like a lot of people are using like psychedelics or other drugs to, and they'll describe seeing the leaves of the trees and all of a sudden, oh my gosh, look at all that detail. But I think what you're saying is you don't need to do these other things to find those simple truths. They're right there for us. And
yeah,
oftentimes we're just blind to it. But
yeah,
Christ wants to restore that childlike wonder of beauty because you're right, it is a fallen world. And a lot of times it's so easy to become stressed and destroyed by it.
sure.
And when things are bad, the crazy thing is the sun is always still shining. The
Hmm.
flowers are always still beautiful. And if that is what eternity is like, I think that perspective can really help people now to get through the hard times because we're not promised that we're not going to have hard times,
Right.
right?
Yeah. Just the
All right.
opposite, actually.
Yeah, very much so the opposite.
Yeah.
Yeah, becoming a Christ follower doesn't mean everything is going to go well. That's for sure. All right. So before we get into your part two, I would like to take on a little bit of a hat of a skeptic because, as you have probably seen with some of the comments on the TikTok video that I edited, I mean, you get people who are going to say, you're just hallucinating. You're having a fever dream. He's making it up for attention. And to frame that, I think sometimes as Christ followers, even when things aren't just or nice to us, I think God gives us the ability to just take it. And we don't always have to respond in kind. We can take in the energy that's dark and we can respond with light, with which a lot of times is not our natural reaction.
Yeah.
So what would you say to people that say you're just having a fever dream when you have these stories?
Well, I'll tell you, I took all those and this kind of wraps up the second half of what happened. I should probably start there, but in the book that I wrote that was just
Hmm.
released like a month ago,
Hmm.
I took a lot of online comments and I put them in the book and I said, okay, these are the basic theories of what happened to me that people say, and I refute every one of them. First of all, the high temperature hallucination. Yes, I had a high temperature, and it can cause a hallucination. I had 104. It was over 104. That was in the operating room. But then I started thinking, well, a hallucination, okay, if I'm going to see things, uh, you know, can I touch it? Can I interact with it? Can it transport me somewhere else and give me such complete detail? And then the next day, this is where the second half comes in. And I'll tell you why I didn't tell it in a minute,
Please.
but the second part of it is Jesus showed up the next day, 24 hours later, and it made me sound like I'd lost my mind when I was telling my friends. But he showed up when I was battling pneumonia. I came down with pneumonia and I almost died. And when I came down with pneumonia, the nurses would come running in. They packed me in ice. They started giving me like oxygen. And I'll never forget her words. She says, the nurse listens to my chest. She goes, "Oh, honey, you're developing pneumonia." And I thought, man, that's why Jesus showed me heaven because I'm going to die. I waited 4 days to go to the hospital with ruptured appendix. And so he showed up the next day and is telling me all these things. Like, first thing he said was, I had to get you flat on your back away from all the distractions so that you could hear me. And so that what that told me was, okay, I'm not able to even hear God's voice right now because I am too stressed out. I've got kids in athletics. I was super busy in all their lives. I was running all these organizations and doing all this stuff. And I was stressed out at work. I had a really stressful job. And so here I am flat on my back. Now I have no other choice but to hear God talk to me. So that was the first thing he said. And then as I'm having this 3 hour conversation with Jesus, he's in the room, but I can't see him this time, which was really weird. I
Hmm.
knew he was there. There was this holy presence, and I just knew. And I kept saying, "Are you really here? Is this really happening, or
Hmm.
is this my imagination?" And he kept saying, "It's really happening. I need to tell you some things. I need to talk to you." And so after about an hour, the nurse takes my temperature and it was down to 100.5. And so I'm back down to normal. And this so-called hallucination is still happening for another 2 hours. He kept talking and I kept talking and, saying all this weird stuff. I mean, he was telling me stuff that I thought was weird, but I just kept saying, is this really happening? Is this really real? And he told me that our story, he calls it our story, is going to be heard by millions of people. And I laughed. I said, I'm not Billy Graham. Now you have to remember 21 years ago in 2004, YouTube didn't have channels. TikTok certainly wasn't around. We didn't have channels where we could talk about NDEs. It was just all music videos. And
Hmm.
so I said, no, you got the wrong guy. I'm not Billy Graham. There's no way I'm going to talk to millions of people. I didn't like talking to, groups of people. But after this NDE, I kept having these moments where I would be pushed in front of all these people in these organizations that I was running, and I talked to bigger and bigger crowds. And so I got really comfortable with that. And I thought, okay, it's kind of weird, but the way he kind of pushed me and just kept saying, okay, you need to do this, you need to do this. And I got better at public speaking. And now I do it all the time. Doesn't bother me at all. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
so when he said millions, I thought I'd have to go stand in front of millions of people or, hundreds of thousands in a football stadium and talk to them at one time. And I thought, there's no way I'm doing that. So I told him, I said, no, you got the wrong guy. I'm not going to do that. And he just chuckled. He didn't say, he didn't give me details. And I've heard God's voice audibly probably another 20 times since then. But I hear him in my spirit all the time. And I've had these confirmations of things that he tells me. Like I don't know if you've ever seen the video where I tell about the $1,000 that I got back.
Mm-hmm.
I heard this voice at this fundraiser that we were doing for church to send kids to camp, and I heard somebody say in my ear, "I want you to give $1,000." And I turned around and I was like, "What?" And I heard it again. I want you to give $1,000. It was like one of my friends, talking in my ear. And so, long story short, I gave the money. Another friend of mine said, well, God knew that you would tell me, so I'm going to take that as a challenge. He gave $1,000. So we went up, put the check in. Next day, I had a stock account from TD Ameritrade. And one of my speculative stocks went up, and there was an extra $1,000 in there. I cashed out and I got the $1,000 back the very next day.
Mm-hmm.
So, so anyway, the the reason I didn't tell the part of the conversation was because after I got out of the hospital, I spent 12 days in the hospital. I got home, I was really thin. I had some friends come over one at a time. They would sit down on the couch and I'd say, you're not going to believe what happened. And I would be crying as I'm telling them about this near-death experience. And they're holding my hand. These are like 45, 50-year-old men holding
Mm-hmm.
my hand and crying right along with me. And I got to the point where I said, you know, told them about the glory of the Lord and all of that. And we're crying. And then I said, you're not going to believe it, but Jesus actually came back the next day. 24 hours later, he came into my room and their expression went from, tears and just this awe to like, dude, you're crazy. I don't believe you anymore. And I told that to like five or six friends, and they all had the same reaction. Like they just stopped believing me. And I heard Jesus whisper, you don't have to tell this part yet. So I
Mm-hmm.
thought, thank you, because I have no credibility. They're going to think that the whole thing's crazy because I had brain damage or something because of
Mm-hmm.
because of this. And so I just stopped telling that part.
So that
And
whisper, if I could just jump in quick,
yeah,
that whisper, is that the same as you heard in church, where it's kind of the back of your head and you hear an audible voice? And
that
is the
actually
voice
wasn't an audible
consistent?
voice, but it was
Okay.
it was it was the same voice that Jesus talked to me for 3 hours in the hospital. Yeah.
So this is almost like it's in your mind, you're not hearing, but you're feeling the words. Would that be a better way to describe it?
Yeah, that's a good way to describe
Yep.
it. Yeah. Yeah. I
Yep.
mean, I hear the words and I always question like, am I thinking that or is that really you? And I'll
Right.
always get that confirmation. No, it's me. It's from me. Um,
Right.
and so I stopped telling that part because it was crazy. So
So there's
then
not a tone associated with it. It's a deep knowing in your mind.
yes, but I hear the words, but I don't hear them through my ears, if that
Right.
makes sense. Like
So
I
can
have
you
heard
describe a
audible
timbre
voices.
or a tone?
It's like somebody speaking, like next to me, but I don't hear it with my ears. It's just really hard to
Hmm.
explain. I
Hmm.
hear that voice a lot.
So it's
Um,
more than a feeling.
oh, it's definitely more than a feeling.
Yes.
Yeah, it's
Right.
words. Yeah,
Yep. Okay.
yeah,
All
I
right.
can I can definitely hear it. But like I said, not with my ears. I hear it with my spirit.
Yes.
It's in my head, but I know it's from God.
Yes.
So I stopped telling that part.
Mm.
And then Jesus keeps working on me, working on me. One of the things that he said was, when you step out in faith, the enemy steps up his attack. That was a voice. That was Jesus talking to me in the hospital room. And I thought, okay, sounds kind of scary. I
Hmm.
mean, I don't want to be under some spiritual attack. But he just kept saying our story's gonna be heard by millions. And he just kept telling me all these things that were going to happen in my life. And now it wasn't like, go tell the world that the world's going to end. It wasn't some weird thing like that. It was more just about me and what I'm going to do and what he's calling me to do. He was saying, I need you to step out. This is what you're going to do. And at first I was really reluctant. So then 20 years goes by. I wrote a book 8 years after that as a fiction story. It was called Accidental Heaven, and it did really well. I didn't really promote it. I just put it on Amazon, let it sell. I figured, oh, God, if you want somebody to read it, they'll find it. But then 20 years later, after the NDE, Guidepost called me, the publication Guidepost,
Hmm.
and they asked if they could put my story, my real story. I have no idea where they even heard it. I mean, my Accidental Heaven had been out for 12 years, and all of a sudden, Guidepost contacts me via email. And the lady that runs it said, we're doing this series of stories on near-death experience. Wonder if we could use your story if you would talk to one of our authors and write it. And so I said, okay. So the book comes out, and when the story came out, I read it. There was like three other NDE stories in there.
Hmm.
And I thought, that's kind of cool. There's my real story, not my fictional story, but my real
Hmm.
story, going to Christians, basically a Christian audience. And I thought that was neat. And so I'm watching a YouTube video of this guy in Alabama. He has a brand new, uh, he started doing YouTube. He had a podcast for a little while, and then he set up a studio in his house.
Hmm.
And I'm watching him, and I hear the same voice, Jesus' voice, say, I want you to contact him.
Hmm.
And I thought he was talking about the guest because the guest was a pastor in Florida. And I went to bed that night thinking that I was supposed to contact this guy named Steve. And I thought, well, how am I going to find this guy? Find him on social media. And
Hmm.
then I hear it again. I hear the voice again, and he says, I want you to contact the host. And so I'm like, okay, I got to contact this guy, Stacy McCants. And so I
Yep.
went on his show. He does, oh gosh, a Stronger Faith podcast. It's really good.
Really good.
Um, And when I contacted him, I think he had 16,000 followers. I think he's got like, I don't know, two couple 100,000 now, but it's just blown up. And from that appearance, all these other things happened until I reached over 1 million views.
Hmm.
And so as soon as we hit 1 million on that one video, I thought, wow, I should probably count them up because Jesus said you're gonna reach millions, and he's right. I mean, I estimate now that with the radio shows that I've done, and all over, like I talk to TV hosts and radio, I think probably 10 million people have heard my testimony, which is pretty cool.
It's super cool and it's very validating. So before we get more into maybe some of the details you learned while you're in the hospital bed, what was it like for those 20 years? It seems like you saw some doors starting to open
Mhm.
where something was happening. But did you feel impatient? Did you want to talk about it? Is it exhausting to talk about? What was that like emotionally?
At first, when I talked about it, yeah, it was draining because it was so emotional. I mean, I couldn't, probably 10 years. I mean, even now, when I tell people the NDE story, I'll have to sit there and catch my breath because I'll start crying, even 20 years later, 21 years later. Yeah, it was exhausting and it was draining. And I just thought, I don't know. I don't know if I can do this. But as I talk, so the 20 years, the first part of it, when people would say you're crazy, I'd be like, screw you.
Hmm.
I don't care what you think. And God was working on my heart, saying, that's not being a good representation of Jesus. You need to back off a little bit and understand that these are unbelievers, and you need to represent Christ in a way that's going to make them curious. I've always said I'm just a mustard seed. I want to plant that seed in somebody's brain and have them go, maybe there is something to this Jesus guy. Maybe I should look at it. Become a Lee Strobel. You probably know his story, right? He was a reporter. He was an unbeliever. And now he's like, an ambassador for Christ. So for those 20 years, he just worked on me, worked on my heart, and gave me more patience and gave me more compassion and empathy for these people. These people are going to hell without Jesus, and once I started realizing that that's what I'm dealing with, and the father of all lies is throwing stuff into their face all the time, constantly. I mean, social media is full of just garbage, just lies.
Mhm.
Uh, and like when people, one of the comments that I get a lot is people that say, I believe in science. I don't believe in God. It's like, okay, well, if you think about what you're saying, you're putting your faith in men. You're not putting your faith in God. And I've had that conversation a few times. They don't want to hear it. But who came up with science? Well, who came up with carbon dating? You know, that's all done by men.
The timing is very interesting as well because you have people like Joe Rogan and even cosmic skeptic Alex O'Connor, and they're starting to say a very specific point about the whole science thing, and that's the Big Bang explanation is itself a miracle, that something turned into everything. And it's
Right,
just as unexplainable and just as much as a miracle as believing that a man named Jesus was resurrected. But it
right.
took decades for that narrative, which I think is obvious if you look at it.
Hmm.
But it took
Hmm.
decades for that to start rising to the surface. And it is rising to the surface right now on the internet all over. So I think
Yeah,
it's very interesting that you had decades of being prepared to be able to say these things. And now it's occurring at the time where I think a lot more people are starting to seriously consider whether there may be some level of veracity to the claims laid out in the New Testament.
yeah,
So,
yeah, yeah.
all right, so we
And I could
fast
say
forward
it, and
then.
I
Oh,
def I
sorry.
defend it with confidence now. I'm
Yeah.
like, there's no question in my mind. I mean, you start getting all these confirmations of, getting your $1,000 back or getting this prayer answered or that prayer answered. Or, there was one where I gave $200 to a pastor and my mother-in-law hands me another 20. She says, I want to help too, and I was like, oh, that's a weird amount, 220. And come on, I don't want to do that. And she goes, I said, well, what if God wants you to give me $20, maybe God will tell you to do it. And she says, well, how do you know he didn't? So I took the 220. So I hand this $220 to this pastor because I heard a voice that said, help them. I give him 220 the next day or that night after I gave it to him. He calls me and he says, my wife went into this tire shop. One of the tires was going flat. And the guy said, hey, I've got a set of used tires out there that I can put them on because your tires are bald. I wouldn't even drive them around this little town that we lived in. And he says, do you know how much the estimate was? I was like, no, what? How much? And he goes, $220.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
okay. And then like a couple of days later, I get a check in the mail for $2,200 that was the from some job that I'd helped. I Before I became the superintendent, I was a painting contractor and I'd helped this guy paint his house. But he
Mm-hmm.
was a friend. I said, I don't need any money. So he sends me $2,200 for helping him to cover the paint and some of my labor. And I thought, okay, 10% of 2,200 is 220 bucks. So I just tithed on an amount that I hadn't even gotten yet, which was another, it's like all these weird things just keep happening.
Mm-hmm.
But, it's of God.
Yeah, totally. When little coincidences just keep stacking up, it's hard to
Yeah.
explain that in any other way to look at it,
Yeah.
other than there's
Yeah.
something with the divine occurring. So you said on day two, you're in the hospital bed, and Jesus says a lot of weird stuff. What is that weird stuff? Try to be as specific as you can.
Um, he said, well, the first weird one was when he said our story's going to be heard by millions. I said, no, not Billy Graham. Um, you got the wrong guy. And he just kind of chuckled. Other things that he said was, getting you flat on your back away from all the distractions so you could hear my voice. He said you'll have some valleys to go through, to walk through, but trust me, I've already approved them, which I thought was pretty strange. Like you've approved bad stuff to happen in my life. Why would you do that? Um, I mean, I kind of felt like Job, in the Bible. Like God said, "Hey, go ahead, do whatever you want with this guy Job," And I thought, man, I don't want to go through all that. But then I just sort of put that whole thing behind me, and I'm living my life as this construction superintendent. And then when bad things would happen, it would just pop back into my head, like, wow, this is one of those valleys. But he said, when you're walking through it, just know that I'll carry you. And I thought that was kind of weird too. Like I didn't know those things happened. Like Jesus was never uh, a personal savior, somebody that I could talk to like that until that moment. And then when it started, when I was walking through the valleys, my dad passed away suddenly. He was pretty young. I would always think, is that what you were talking about, Jesus? I mean, is this one of the valleys? And I just would get strength from prayer. I would just, talk to him and say, this is a rough one, but I thought, maybe something good's going to come from his death. I had my best friend was killed in a car accident, a racing accident, and this is actually kind of a cool story. So he was my best friend. We went on vacations together. We coached baseball together. His son went off to college and was roommates with my son in Santa Barbara. And he got into racing because he was an adrenaline junkie. And he hit the wall going over 100 miles an hour and it killed him. And I thought, what good could possibly come from this? I mean, they had over 1,000 people at his funeral. A couple years later, I ran into a friend of mine. We had been acquaintances. I knew him as a baseball coach too, and hadn't seen him in a couple years. But I did see him at Mark's funeral, and he was playing on a church league softball team, and I ran into him on the field. And I said, Frank, I didn't even know you were a Christian.
Hmm.
And he says, funny thing, Mike, after Mark's funeral, I became a Christian because of his death. And I was like, really? And he goes, yeah. And he says, and a couple years or a couple months before that, my oldest son got out of college, came back, and he went to work for this guy, Frank, this friend. And he said, Frank is this on fire Christian. He talks to everybody in the hospital about Jesus. And I was like, wow. I mean, so that's something he's raised his kids as Jesus followers. So because of that my friend's death, we now have another friend that got saved, and he's raising all his kids. So that's generations and generations. Who knows the impact that that's going to have? It's that ripple effect that you don't know until, I have a sit down with Jesus in heaven and say, okay, show me all all the good that came from all that bad.
Mhm.
Um, but it's just coincidences like that just stuff like that just keeps happening.
So you mentioned a couple of the valleys, which seem like pretty deep valleys,
Hmm.
and I'm sure there's others. How do you think these affected your ability now to tell the story, if at all?
Well, I'm not, I think that like before the ND, I protected my personal life. Like I didn't talk a lot about my personal life. I just wasn't comfortable with it. I was a very private person. But part of that was because of who I was married to at the time. That was another valley that I had to go through. I uncovered a secret life that my wife had been living for like years and years and years. And that was quite a blow. I mean, ended up getting a divorce. It was tough on my kids.
Hmm.
Divorce is never easy, but this one it was brutal. And for years and years and years, 4 or 5 years, I'd say, just kept coming up, just all this. She would just not let me go. Um, but I ended up meeting somebody after we divorced and got married. And in fact, my new book, I said, I'm going to dedicate it to my wife, among other people, but because now I know what it's like to be truly loved. She loves me like unconditionally. And that wasn't the case in my first marriage. And so
Hmm.
God said, okay, I'm going to use this bad thing. And she became a Christian because of me too. I
Wow.
mean, not because of me, but because I introduced her to Jesus. The Holy Spirit does that work, right? But so there's another soul, saved for the kingdom. And
And
now
that
she's the one dragging me to church.
Yeah, and I would assume having a good marriage now is so much more helpful when you go and embark on this new journey of sharing your
Yeah,
story because you come home to a home of comfort and of love. So I would imagine that majorly prepared the way for you.
sure did. And I think that a lot of those personal stories that I tell now, that I think, God's okay with me opening up about this kind of stuff, because it's going to help somebody. That's all part of my testimony. A lot of people go through some tough times. I mean, I get prayer requests and messages from people saying we need a miracle or pray for this person, and I don't know. I take it all in stride now. I think I'm doing what I can. I want to hear God say, "Well done, good and faithful servant," because
Mhm.
I'm 66 years old. I don't have that much time left.
Yeah, I imagine that what you just mentioned there too is almost an additional burden placed on you. When people hear your story, they're going to want to idolize you. They're going to want to make you a hero, and they're going to
Yeah,
think that you have supernatural connection to Jesus that they don't have. What would
yeah.
you say to those people?
The very first thing I say is, I am nothing special. You have every bit as much a power as a believer that I do. If you believe, like what the Bible says, if you tell that mountain to move and you command it to move in Jesus' name, it's moving. And I've had people say, "Can you pray that these demons leave?" And I'll, leave my. I had one yesterday that said, "My husband's been having an affair. He's possessed by a demon. I'm sure of it." She was in Africa, and I said, if you're a believer, you have the power to get rid of demons just as much as I do. You're there. Go lay hands on them and do it. Do what Jesus commands. You have that power. I am nothing special. I mean, that's the first thing I tell everybody. I'm nothing special.
Mhm. That's great. Well, let's go back to the hospital bed again. Now that you
Sure.
mentioned that he said you'd have valleys, which again, I, like you, find that very, very interesting that God does pre-approve and is aware. And that makes sense too, because we live in a world full of suffering. Christ came, died, resurrected, and it's not like the suffering disappeared, right? So,
Right.
but what else did he tell you?
Um, let's see. There was well, some of the valleys. He just said one of the first things he said was, "I want more." I can't remember how he put it. I'm calling you out to do more for the kingdom. Something like that. I'd have to go back and look at my notes because I do. There's so many things going on in my head at, all these, I start talking about prayer requests and start thinking about that. I get lost. Um,
Mhm.
but yeah, that was one of the things. How many people our story would see, or how many people would hear our story. The valleys, he talked nothing specific. There's never any detail in the things that he asks me to do. It's all just, you're going to do this, and then the details are left up to me.
Like the
Uh,
podcast story. He said, you thought originally it was the person being interviewed, and then
yeah,
later there was clarification it was the host.
yeah, yeah, exactly. Um, let's see. Told me that I think I told you this, that when you step out in faith, the enemy steps up his attack. And that scared me. So we had a little bit of a conversation about that, like attack. Like, what do you mean? What are you talking about? What kind of attack? And he would say, just reassure me. When the attacks happen, whatever happens, I'll be with you. I'll carry you through it, that kind of stuff. And to be honest with you, for 3 hours, probably 2 hours of it was me saying, "Are you sure this is really happening? Am I just imagining this?"
Mm.
Because I kept pressing him. Is this real? Because I would talk audibly, and there was a nurse sitting there because I was in ICU still. There was a nurse sitting there telling me to breathe into this barometer, and she couldn't hear me talk.
Mm.
Like I would talk. Then when it first happened, when I heard Jesus say, "I had to get you flat on your back," I looked at her and I said, "Did you hear that?" And she says, "Hear what?" And I said, "You didn't hear that?" And she says, "No." She says, "Try breathing in this barometer again." So I would, hold it. I was so weak I couldn't pick my hands up off my chest, and I would just hold it like that, and I would breathe. And he would say something, and like he would say, "Michael," and I would look at her, and she wasn't like looking around, like what? She couldn't hear him. And so when I started talking to him, she couldn't hear me.
Mm.
So I thought that was kind of like supernatural, like it's just me and Jesus. And um, the atmosphere in the room seemed to change when I say something holy entered the room. Uh, I can't even describe that, but it's almost like you could see sparkles of dust floating in the room. Uh, it was like some kind of weird dream,
Mm.
but I would look, and I could focus on these dust specks that were almost glowing, and I would look at them and go, "What is that?" And then I would think, "Oh, that I'm just hallucinating." And then Jesus would start talking. Um, Most of what he said was just about me and my future and the impact that I was going to have for
Mhm.
him, and that he would give me strength, all that kind of stuff. There was nothing real um, earth-shattering.
When he
It
was
it all
telling
had
you
to do with my life.
about spiritual attacks, was that something you had a perspective on before, or were you really a little flabbergasted in that moment and really had no idea what he was talking about? And then tell me about what he did tell you and how you started to understand. Was it vague? Was it specific? Did he mention demons, or did he just more mention these valleys?
Never mentioned demons. I had heard of spiritual attack, but I just, I didn't. I don't know if I really believed in it. The whole spirit world. It just, I don't know. I'd never really given it much thought. I mean, I consider myself, like I said in that one video, a Sunday Christian, just kind of something you do on Sunday morning because it's good for the kids. I had friends in church, and we went to a Bible class in the morning. So I was kind of learning this stuff, and I'd been baptized like probably 10 years before this happened,
Hmm.
but it just didn't have a meaning, like
Right.
it was just, I don't know, it's just something you
Yep.
do. So no, he never got specific. He never gets specific. I've had voices from him, where he doesn't tell me something specific, but the one time that he got specific, it's kind of funny. we just bought a house in Chattanooga, Tennessee. Great big house, and it's a dump. I mean, it's just a disaster. Everything needs to be updated, and the pipes, the plumbing pipes are bad. Everything's bad. So before we moved in, I did some work. We listed our house in North Georgia, and so all my tools were still there, but I brought a couple of tools with me every day, and I brought one single screwdriver. And so I was up I was going to take down this light fixture, and usually it's a Phillips screwdriver that you need now, but this one, they're so old, they didn't even have Phillips back then. So I needed to take down this light fixture. And I climbed the ladder and I'm looking at it and I go, oh, shoot, I need the screwdriver. Well, I had one screwdriver on the job site on the new house that I'm renovating. And I'm running all over the place looking for it. I'm really frustrated. I can't find it. I've got tools thrown everywhere. The house is just a disaster. There's a mess everywhere. So I'm looking all over for this screwdriver, and I finally said, God, I need some help finding this screwdriver. I have no idea what's going on. And I thought I need to just go sit down and just think. I'll have my lunch. It was lunchtime, so I had brought a sandwich. Sat down, I'm eating my sandwich, and this it was almost like a movie started playing in front of my eyes. Like I'm seeing with my eyes, like all of a sudden there's a movie screen. And it's me the day before. And I was doing some work with the screwdriver. And I took it out and I put the screwdriver in my pocket, in my pants, which I don't normally do. And then the movie fast forward to me sitting down in my truck, getting ready to go home, and the screwdriver poked me. And so I took it out and I put it in my center console and I closed the lid. And so I hear Jesus say, the screwdriver's in your truck. This was before the movie started playing. I hear him say, your screwdriver's in your truck. And I was so frustrated. I said, it's not in my truck like that. And I'm thinking, okay, I'm talking back to God. He knows where everything is. He's trying to help me here. And I hear the chuckle again. And I thought, huh, okay, well, so I walked out to the truck and I looked. I just looked in the windows and I said, it's not here. So that's when I went and sat down and had the sandwich. And the movie starts playing. And I see myself put it in the center console. So after I finished my sandwich, I walk back out to the truck. I open it up and I open the center console. Well, there's the screwdriver. And I felt so stupid. I was like, I'm so sorry. I should learn to listen better. You're helping me. I'm really sorry. And it didn't get a response, but I found the screwdriver. And so, and later that night on the way home, it's about an hour drive back to my house. I was just thinking, God wants to be involved in every little detail of our life. And I keep pushing him away. I got to stop doing that. And this was just like 6 months ago that this happened. And I just, I thought I'm still bullheaded at times when, I should be listening and I should have changed completely by now. But I don't know, the world just keeps creeping back in and saying, nah, that didn't really happen. You're crazy.
Couple things come to mind with that. One, the screen that you see, can you describe? I mean, is this a 2D thing? Is it a TV or is it a picture in a picture with the vignette? And then when the fast forwarding happened, I mean, is it like a time lapse and you're like this? Give us a little more detail.
Okay, so the screen looked like it was probably about 2 feet wide by almost square, but more rectangle. And it just appeared. And it was almost like the dust that I saw in the hospital room, but it all made sense. It all came together and it held. So there was not like a frame around it. It's just boom, it's there.
Hmm.
It's more 2D. It's not really any depth of field, but it looked like it was me watching myself. It wasn't like me watching myself on my iPhone. It wasn't like a video. It was,
Like the camera's your eyes.
yeah, yeah. Exactly. Like if a friend of mine was standing there in the room looking at me on standing on this ladder, working with the screwdriver, and then when it fast forwarded, I didn't see myself go, brrr, I just all of a sudden it's me looking or it's me getting in the car. But I'm looking from the passenger side, which I had just looked in, which I thought was weird. But when I sat down, it was my right pocket, so I could see my hand pulling that screwdriver out
Mm.
from that vantage point. It wasn't my vantage point looking down and seeing me. I was actually watching myself do this. So I thought he wanted to make sure that I could see that, yeah, you're pulling it out of your pocket and look where you put it.
Hmm.
So
Well, I
I
think
hope
that's a
that
good
helps.
story for just kind of explaining some of your mentality about how hard it really can be to trust and listen to God. And even people who have met God, it's still a struggle because we are
Yeah.
so separate at times, it feels like, in this world. So it makes me think, after your incident in the hospital, had you not met Jesus, had you not learned so much and felt that personal relationship, what do you think those valleys would have done to you had you not had Christ?
Oh man. Um, well, the valleys that I walked through were pretty devastating, even with them.
Mhm.
But I did, at the end of the day, I would feel the comfort, and I could just, I felt like Jesus was, walking there with me, arm around me, you know. Uh, if that hadn't happened, man, I don't know. I mean, losing my dad was was awful, and it still is. I mean, you lose a parent, and you just feel alone. 6 months after that, my mom passed away, and they had been married for like 57 years, I think. So yeah, that was tough. Uh, I don't know what it would have done to me.
Mhm.
Would have just been was devastating enough, but it would have been even worse. Maybe, who knows? I would have gone into depression or I don't know. I don't know.
Mhm.
I don't even want to think about that.
Yeah, not a comfortable thought.
Yeah.
How did your parents react to all of this?
They pretty much had the reaction that everybody else did, like, wow, I mean, even my dad had tears in his eyes, and he's an old school, he was a sheriff, and he was a cop, so he was tough on the outside, but it brought him to tears too. And my mom too, she was sobbing. But they were thinking, I think they were, like my mom, she was, she's a mom, so she's thinking more like, I'm so glad that you lived, you came so close to dying.
Mhm.
That I think she was focused more on me than than an experience with Jesus. But dad got it. I mean, I think mom did too, but it's just, the whole story is just so hard to believe.
Mhm.
But it was it was something that I asked God to do, and He did it.
Why do you think people can't believe part two?
I'm not sure. I just I think maybe it was me, that was kind of embarrassed by it, because I felt like I don't want to feel like an idiot,
Mhm.
telling this story. And then I think after going public with it, it's like now I don't care what people think. They're gonna judge me anyway by the world standards. People that and even Christians will judge me and say
Yeah.
that's not biblical. I hear that a lot. But my answer to that is always, well, do you believe Jesus answers prayers? Because this was a childhood prayer. This was an answer to a prayer. So you can't have it both ways. But I think it had more to do with me, you know, feeling like, because at the time I had a really good job. It was stressful, yeah, but I was making a ton of money. And I thought, these people think I'm crazy. I'm going to get fired because they're, you
Sure.
know, they're not going to respect me. They're not going to, there's just no way. And I don't want to lose my job. But I ended up leaving the job anyway after. couple more years because it just was too stressful. So yeah, I think it was just me.
That makes sense. So when we think about the amount of time that's passed since this incident, and when you recollect it now, is it similar to almost like a 9/11 moment where you remember very specific moments, or does some of this fade over time? And I ask that also in context of the gospel writers. They were told they'd be reminded of what happened by the Holy Spirit. Do you
Mhm.
feel like some of that is happening to you and the memory is just as vivid had it happened yesterday?
It's funny because the near-death experience part is still as vivid now in my mind as it ever was. The conversation, I took notes as soon as I was strong enough to hold a pencil. I asked my wife to bring a notebook in, and I took hospital notes so I wouldn't forget because I thought I don't want to forget any detail. And so that part has kind of faded a bit, where all of a sudden I'll think, oh, that's right. That was something else that Jesus said. Um, so those things do flood back. But the NDE, man, I close my eyes, I can still see it, smell
Hmm.
it, feel the hand of Jesus in my hand, feel his skin. I can feel all that stuff. So yeah, it's that part's as real as it ever was.
And that deepness of the memory, that must really stick with you, kind of like you're saying, where when you look at the sun, you remember it. Um, Do you get that feeling when you're talking to people that seem to be sincere Christ followers in person, or if they're hurting, does any of that comfort bubble up a little bit more? And are you able to share it with them? Does it work?
Yeah, I am okay sharing it now. Depending on the setting though. Like usually if I'm talking to a crowd of people, I don't get that like one-on-one connection.
Hmm.
So I don't like it's easier for me not to cry when I talk like that. But if I'm talking to somebody in person, you're looking into their eyes and you can see that there's some hurt there or there's some struggles or whatever. And I can just feel that. And I just feel like the Holy Spirit gives me the words to say to comfort somebody. It's almost before any of the podcasts, I always pray, God, I don't want to talk. You talk. You just use me. Let the Holy Spirit speak through me. Make sure I throw out something that maybe I don't remember, but you just make sure that it gets said. And so, but yeah, so the talking to people, it's easier, but I just feel that like way more empathy than I ever had, especially an unbeliever, you know. But most of the interaction now is just social media, and social media can be just so ugly.
I kind of hate it. I mean, I make
Yeah.
these edits, but I don't really scroll. I just don't do TikTok really or Instagram as far as scrolling because I refuse to have an algorithm dictate what I watch.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I post stuff all the time and I'm thankful for that algorithm. But I think you're right. You have to find some sort of a balance with that. I
Yeah.
think things are a little out of balance right now.
Well, the TikTok
Um,
algorithm, I think, has me figured out. It's got all Chattanooga, Tennessee stuff and Jesus followers. And
yep.
every once in a while, I'll get some weird stuff, but I'll just skip through that. And
Yeah, they
yeah,
dial it in, that's for
yeah,
sure.
yeah.
What strikes me about your answer about what you remember is that if you were lying, I think you would keep the lie up and say, I remember all the details on day two as well. But you're not doing that. This
No.
sounds like a very human experience. And, I personally have had interactions and moments that stand out, and some of them stay clear, and some of them start to slip a little bit. So
Mhm.
for me, when I hear that, it tells me you're telling the truth. On that concept, is there any final thoughts you would say to people who don't believe you? I know you already hinted on this a little bit and in the beginning, but if you were to get at the heart of the matter and somebody's looking at you and they really don't want to believe it, is there anything you can even say?
Well, if they're really not going to believe me, then probably not.
Hmm.
But I would just say, don't take my word for it. Start asking Jesus to reveal himself to you. And I honestly believe that he will. But I also tell people be patient because this took 40 years. So, but what's 40 years to God, right? Um, so if an unbeliever is not going to believe me, I try to make the point that, like I said earlier, you're putting your faith in somebody, in science, or just look at it that way. Who do you want to believe? And if there is nothing after this life, that's just such an empty, hollow life that you're leading, you know. But I have the hope in Jesus, and I just always want to just be that mustard seed, Just do a little research on your own. Do it. Just open your mind and look at, like I mentioned, Lee Strobel. Look at it like he did. Start really looking at it and investigating. Don't just get your opinions from social media or from whatever, from Facebook or and break that algorithm that they're in, because I know what they're seeing in their feed every day. It's going to be, save the planet, global warming, all
Yeah.
these things that that the devil's going to throw at you to keep you distracted. That's the other thing that happens to us too, is there are so many distractions in this world. Um, you know, I started after the NDE, I started cracking the Bible every day, and I finished reading the Bible through in a year. I did one of the programs. And back then I had to have a little Bible. I actually put it in my back pocket at work, and at lunchtime I'd go sit down and read it for 10 or 15 minutes. And I consider that one of like the biggest the I'm most proud of that, the fact that I did actually read the whole Bible.
Hmm.
I think that's one of my biggest accomplishments besides raising four, Christian children. Uh, but I don't know. I guess if somebody's not going to believe me, they're just not going to believe me. But I do ask them to look at it, to ask God to reveal himself. And I just pray that the Holy Spirit takes over and hits them over the head somehow. I mean, who knows what's going to happen? They're gonna get to a point where they're gonna be flat on their back. Something's gonna happen to them, and that's when God reaches us a lot of times, is in those darkest times. So if something happens, maybe I'll plant that seed, and maybe when something goes wrong in their life, they'll cry out to God.
I feel that deeply. I think of the line, there's no atheist in a foxhole. And I think it's
Right.
true. I
Yeah.
think when people are in those moments, no matter what they claim to believe, they will pray because there's something deep within us. And I also would say that if you think of what a cult leader is, of somebody who's lying, those are not the people who say, go look elsewhere to verify this story. They would never say, hey, go Google it yourself and find out it's true. They would want
Right.
to have the power, keep manipulating, and you're not doing that at all. You're
No.
saying, ask God, try it for yourself. And I would challenge people that if you're resistant to asking God, why is that?
Yeah.
Why
Yeah.
won't
Good
you even
question.
try?
Right. Right.
You know?
That's a great point.
Yeah. Well,
Well, so the weird part that I told you about, Jesus coming back the next day, I was
mhm.
interviewed by John Burke.
Yep.
Um, you know who he is.
Yep.
And we had a long conversation. And he said, when I told him that part, he said, Mike, I was going to ask you if Jesus came back and visited you again, because he said 30%, I think it was 30%, 31%, whatever. He's talked to over 1,500, NDE survivors. He said 30% of them of people that have NDEs say that Jesus came back the next day.
Hmm.
And I was like, what? And he says, yeah. So I was like, so you don't think I'm crazy? He says, no, not at all. I kind of expected it. So, when I say it was me that didn't want to tell that part, that's kind of confirmation that it was me. I got that reaction from my Christian friends, but it doesn't change the story. So,
Right. Yeah, I wouldn't
yeah,
have assumed it would be. I would just think it's kind of a one and done. Hey, nobody's going to be lucky twice, sort of a
I
thing.
know.
So,
I know.
yeah, I'd have the same opinion.
Yeah.
All right. And I guess one final note I'm thinking here is, do you still doubt? Like, is it still hard sometimes?
Uh, in moments of frustration, like especially working on the house where I just get just so frustrated, I've had so many things go wrong. Sure, I have moments of doubt because I always think, well, Lord, look at all this good stuff I'm doing for you. Can't you just ease up a little bit? But and then I just remember what Jesus said, when you step out in faith, the enemy steps up his attack. And it just happens like all the time. All the time. I mean, it's constant. There's constant battles going on, and I just picture my guardian angel up there, having sword fights or whatever. I know it doesn't happen like that, but I just think, man, you could just have everybody ease up a little bit. And I think at some point things will get easier because the devil's going to realize that, yeah, okay, he's not going to back off. He's a Jesus guy now. I can't get him, so I'll just go on to the next new believer. But yeah, I do sometimes because it's just then it's so hard to comprehend how God could be here forever, could make everything out of nothing, but then it's like, well, if God didn't do it, how would, where did it come from?
It's here.
So it just makes more sense. So I still have those moments, sure.
Hmm.
Not
I
very
think that's
often, but yeah,
I think that's good for people to hear.
yeah,
You can meet Jesus and you can still struggle sometimes.
exactly.
Have those attacks you mentioned, did they ramp up around the time you started to go on these major podcasts?
Yes.
Tell me about that. And how do you know it's spiritual attacks? And a second part is it sometimes coming from other people you trust and they're just like doing things you wouldn't have expected?
Well, sure. Yeah. Well, especially in my marriage. Yeah. When I uncovered the secret life, that was like, wow. And that was 2 years after the NDE. But there were things that just started surfacing after that. Right after the NDE, I went back to my church that I had been going to, once or twice a month. And the pastor came out and said, I had a vision from God. We're going to become a mission church. We're going to build a brand new church. My boss at the time donated all this land on the outskirts of town, and he said, we're going to build a new church out there. And I thought, well, okay, if it's something from God, it should be pretty simple to do. We had met roadblock after roadblock after roadblock. Neighbors said we don't want the church there, too much parking. We had all kinds of issues with the grounds. Then I was on the building committee, and we would have meetings like once every couple of weeks. We'd go to a meeting, and like one of the members came in and said, "I'm going to have to step down. I found out I've got cancer."
Hmm.
And then the next week, somebody else came in and said, "Well, my wife's leaving me, so I'm going to move out of town. I'm going to have to step down." And it was like every meeting there was just some big, huge hurdle that we had to overcome. The city denied us a permit for this, and it just kept going and going and going. Finally, the pastor left the church, which is a whole nother backstory there. I don't think it was really a vision from God. I think he just wanted to be
Yeah.
like, like it was his ego taking over.
Yep.
Yeah.
Common
Uh,
story.
So now that little church, when he left, that little church now sits in the shadow of a Muslim prayer center they built right next door. It was really amazing to see. I mean, the devil had it in for that church, and he just took those plans and just disassembled the whole thing, and it worked.
Wow.
Yeah, pretty sad story.
Well, great. Thank you, Mike. Tell us about your book and what you're doing now and how people could find you.
I am I am way too busy on renovating my house. My book is called I Held the Hand of Jesus in Heaven. It's the story that he told me to finish up, tell the second half. He said, now's the time, the world is ready, and so are you. And I think the world is ready because of the influence that the people like you have had on spreading the Christian message and the fact that NDEs can happen. Now, there are some very bizarre NDEs out there
Yeah.
that I think are from the enemy, but people will come on and they'll to me tell me, oh, you met the devil, this wasn't Jesus, and I'm like, well, look at the other guys, who's whispering in your ear, my story has turned who knows how many people towards Jesus. That's my whole message. Check them out for yourself. Uh, but Jesus himself said, "You'll know a tree by its fruit." And if I met the devil that day, the devil wouldn't be sending people to Jesus. And that's my whole message. As far as getting a hold of me, I've got a website that's got links to all my social media. It's mikemckinsey.com. Um, so they can go there and, they can find me.
Yes, and to finish that up, great segue. I mean, name the channel Bear Fruit with Christ because of that exact
Yeah.
reason.
Yep.
Sometimes there's entire libraries full of books on how to discern the will of God. And a lot of times it's confusing. And even when you're in it, you don't always know, am I actually doing this as I should be doing it? And sometimes the only way to know is if you look back and you see what the fruit was. And the fruit will always tell you. It'll either be good fruit or it'll be a train wreck of destruction.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
Great point.
yeah.
Yeah.
So thank you, Mike. I really appreciate you taking the time. And I wish you best of luck with the house.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. Please pray for me.
All right, I will do.
Yeah.
All right.
Thanks again.
Bye-bye, Mike. Yep.